Hello again, friends. And you are our friends. And Jim Cornette likes me to stress that each and every week. And good morning, and welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, the happiest drive-thru you'll be running into this week.
You'll be running into.
Driving into.
Hopefully driving through, not running into. You're supposed to go sideways down the building instead of straight into it. You don't drive through the window. You drive past the window. Or then it actually,
Ken Patera.
It should be a drive past instead of a drive through, because you do not drive through the window, you drive past it. So this is Jim Cornette's Drive Past. But please don't drive past it. Stop and listen, won't you? We don't know what the fuck we're doing.
By the end of this, someone may want to do a Ken Patera and throw a boulder right through our drive-thru, but we'll find out. But we know what we're doing. We're answering your questions.
No, we don't know what we're doing. We're answering questions, but I don't know what the questions even are. That's the premise of the program, that I don't know the questions ahead of time, but I actually do know some of them because I have some for you today.
See?
And we're making this shit up as we go along, ladies and gentlemen, and pulling it completely out of my voluminous ass because we are pre-taping this program as... When this airs, I will hopefully just have returned from a very time-consuming, hard-working trip to New York City for the fine folks at Major League Wrestling, MLW, on beIN Sports, Saturday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern. But in this case, last week it was on Friday. How's that for you? Because it was a special. And so I don't know what the fuck if anything's happened in the last week, we don't know about it because it hadn't happened yet. And we don't know what we're doing, but we're going to try to prevent you with some programming today. We're going to try to present you with some fine programming today, and it can't get any worse than this. It's bound to look up.
It can only get worse. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to answer your questions, which Jim actually is aware of some of them this week. Apparently, he has admitted here at the top of the show. But they're sent in a number of ways to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com or on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru, and we have a voluminous amount of emails this week.
And one of them, the first one we're going to get to, is from somebody who has actually been complaining that we never answer his questions.
Oh, boy.
And so we're going to get to it because he has finally threatened us, ladies and gentlemen, with legal action if we don't answer his questions. And rather than go to all the trouble of bothering our legal analyst and official sponsor, Stephen P. New, and the law office of Stephen P. New, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084, rather than bothering him with another massive giant case like this, when he is already taking cases against big pharmaceutical companies and big oil companies and that no good coal baron out there in West Virginia. I know he's itching to sue him a time or two. He has gotten millions in judgments against big companies that fuck little people over, little people like you and Brian Last, and even me. I'm a medium-sized person.
Even me?
Even you, little Brian Last. Stephen is the champion of the little guy, and he's also protecting the babies in West Virginia and across the United States born addicted to opioids as part of the opioid crisis. You've heard millions of dollars are changing hands in these judgments because they have fucked us, and now is our time to get even. And Stephen P. New can do that for you. So instead of letting this guy that's been complaining, letting him go to all the trouble of suing us so that we can sick Stephen P. New, our legal beagle, on him and leave no meat laying on his bones. Instead, we're just going to go ahead and answer one of the questions. But that is newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. Just don't try to sue us when you call Stephen P. New, but get even with Stephen.
So, Jim, this show is going to debut on the 8th of April. How many days away from that is the show where Stephen's going to serve you with the papers?
No, he is not serving me. No, listen to me now. No, you've got this. Don't swerve these people all around like that. It is this coming weekend in Madison, West Virginia at All-Star Wrestling, where the Midnight Express and I will be inducted into the All-Star Wrestling Hall of Fame, and Stephen P. New will be there in person to present proclamations to Smoky Mountain Wrestling legends Tracy Smothers, the fantastic Bobby Fulton, and West Virginia's own Brian Logan on behalf of the fans of West Virginia and the state of West Virginia, recognizing their contributions to the wrestling industry. That's this Saturday night at the Madison Civic Center in Madison, West Virginia. That's what paperwork he's bringing.
All right, well, we'll see how that turns out. Maybe next week here on the show we'll talk about that. But
if we don't do next week's show last week,
Well, there you go. Now I'm totally confused. But anyway, let's get some questions here. Let's see how much more confused we can get. This one was sent in by Jordan Snow to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com.
Now, this is the person in question.
This guy, every single week, it's gotten to the point where it's ridiculous. It's like, let's see if this is the week where my question gets read. I'm about to press play. I'm about to listen. He's like doing commentary of the disappointment that he will get when his question gets ignored each and every week. It's not that we ignore it. I haven't seen it. We get hundreds and hundreds of emails.
Yes, we literally go through hundreds and hundreds of these things and get multiple emails. So, Jordan, it's not that we've been doing this on purpose to you. It's just that apparently we have not seen the question. I'm sure they're fine quality questions. I'm sure when you ask me this question right now, I am positive that this question is going to be one of the most thought-provoking questions that we've ever been asked, in a clear and concise manner, that's going to lead to one of the most uproariously funny or incredibly enlightening and entertaining stories that we have yet told here on the Drive-Thru. So Jordan, it's not been on purpose that we've been ignoring you, but now we're going to give you the chance to bring this question to light, and I know it's going to be something that the viewers and listeners are going to remember for years and years and years.
Well, let's provoke that thought. Here's his question. Hello, Mr. Brian Last and Mr. Jim Cornette. Feel free to condense this question when asked on air, if it makes it that far. The important thing to me is an awesome, not necessarily that the entire book I'm writing gets read. I think that first paragraph already had a problem. I hope this email reaches you. My question is both simple and broad in scope, requires a slight bit of explanation, and hopefully will bring about a good discussion. I'm a spry 33 years old, but love territory wrestling, specifically USWA, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and Mid-South. Though I do have an interest in other places such as Florida, California, the Funks in Texas, and the WWA. I spend most of my wrestling viewing time watching the TV from USWA, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and Mid-South through either the network or YouTube. Watching the weekly TV shows from these promotions, I'm feeling a bit unfulfilled. Territory Wrestling TV was squash matches that built feuds towards blow-up matches that happened at house shows. Were these shows USWA, CWA, and Memphis Mid-South Coliseum? Mid-South UWF and Superdome and other buildings? Smoky Mountain Wrestling's bigger shows, not just Night of Legends, Sunday Bloody Sunday, etc., the middle tier house shows. Were these shows filmed? What type of process was used to film? Was it reel, VHS, or some other medium? Was there any planned distribution model for these shows, CWF, UWF in the 1980s? Or was it just for archival footage? Obviously, Jim had distribution plans for his footage and was taping more with USWA than the other two. Lastly, who owns the house show footage for these promotions today? Is it WWE? I guess that is, if these shows were even being filmed. If you want to answer and explain about other territories as it relates to this, awesome as well. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry it's such a long-winded question for such a relatively simple topic. Thank you, Jordan S. Snow. Wow.
All right. Let me slap myself here. Jump back. So the question basically is, did all the territories tape all their shows, and what happened to the tapes?
Yes. House shows, yes.
Yes, house shows, yes. Well, it depends on the territory. It depends on the show. And oftentimes it depended on the tape. That's the best answer I can give you, Jordan. No.
Well, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I know you guys have those house shows.
Well, here's the thing. In Memphis, for example, yes, they taped the TV on Saturday mornings at Channel 5 in the studio. But they also, Jarrett was very early on this, and that's why a lot of Memphis footage still exists. Not all of it, but more than a lot of territories from the late 70s, early 80s, because Jarrett got a camera early on that he could take to the Coliseum on Monday nights And at first it was just a one-camera shoot in the stands, but Lance would do commentary, and that's where they would get their B show, which aired in Tupelo, Mississippi, Jackson, Tennessee, I think sometimes in Jonesboro, Arkansas, where they already got the Memphis TV. So, but they had their own local stations so that to have more programming, because that was still, those towns were 70, 80 miles, 100 miles from Memphis. So they had additional programming to plug the live events in those markets, and it covered spot show territory around the area also. And that would be a B show that was used. But as with most everybody else, as we know, they rolled over the tapes, because even back then, the master tape from from Channel 5 back in the 70s was delivered to Louisville and Evansville and Nashville and Lexington the following week on one of those big 1-inch tape reels. And those things were like $100 a piece. So after about 6 weeks or so, they would take them back to the station and have them dub the copies over those fucking master tapes. The 3/4-inch tapes that were shot in the Coliseum were a little bit cheaper, but they still, after a while, except if it was something really, landmark and somebody wanted it, Lawler wanted to keep a copy, or, oh my gosh, that's where LeDuc did the blood oath, we can't tape that over. They would reuse all those tapes as well. So all those hundreds of hours of wrestling, all that great stuff, was not saved. That's why, the VHS tape collection that I have is one of the biggest collections of Memphis wrestling from 79 to 83, I guess, in the world, because I've got almost everything. I even would take my VCR over to Jarrett's house and have Randy West, the video guy, plug up to my half-inch machine, and I'd tape some stuff before they recorded over it. In Florida, they kept a ton of stuff. That's WWE has that library now. Obviously, in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, they have the TV library. We also, what we did was, Tommy Noe and Brian Hildebrand's dad, they rolled VHS tapes on almost every show we did that they were present for or anywhere around for. But the only stuff that we shot for television was either the TV tapings, or once or twice a month, we would have the camera come to Johnson City or to Knoxville to do local promos for the TV shows, and also shoot the matches in Knoxville that we would know we were going to use for TV. We were going to do something in the finish that would lead to the following month or whatever. So we'd shoot those matches, and then a clip of the last couple of minutes would appear on television. But we didn't, usually shoot the whole card, because we weren't really going to have any use for the preliminary matches. And it just, so there are still some Smoky Mountain Wrestling house show matches that exist, locked away deep in the vault somewhere, but that's just because they're my expensive home movies. And the WWE has the Smoky Mountain Television Library, which is how I paid for my home movies. In other territories, it just depends, Jordan. Some stuff, like I said, they were good at saving stuff in Florida.
Mid-South worked a lot, eventually by the mid-'80s, yeah.
Mid-South, the Power Pro shows were sort of like the B show in Memphis, and that they were taped in the arenas, and they were arena tapes that'd be commentated over later on. And, even then, most house shows were not taped unless you were shooting an angle that needed to be on television, because you ran a house show in the territory days every night of the week, and sometimes twice a night in 2 different locations. So there was just, especially before home video, and even the first 5 or 6 years of the 80s, a lot of that stuff was never taped, because you would never have any reason to use it again. You just had to be a big wrestling mark like me and want to save it all.
Ron Fuller has talked on the Studcast, which is a fine program that everyone should be listening to, about the influence that Eddie Graham had with the filming of the matches in Tampa on when he went to Southeastern. They filmed a lot of the big shows in Knoxville, and they used that footage on TV. How far back did the filming of arena shows specifically to be used, not like, here's this show from the Marigold Arena, but like, here's the show, here's the studio show, or here's the typical show, and now we're going to go to this clip from the arena. How far back did that go? How far back were promoters filming stuff beyond what they intended to be used as the actual television show?
Well, quite a while, because And filming is correct, because before 1977 or so, if you did shoot something in the arenas, it had to be on film. A lot of promotions had 16 millimeter film cameras. And this is why that old Tennessee stuff from the Coliseum in 74, or that's on my DVD that accompanies Tuesday Night at the Gardens, the first scaffold match in 71 in Louisville. The famous Jackie Fargo and Al Green hair match from 72, the first Coliseum sellout. Those things still exist because they were shot on 16 millimeter film and transferred later on, much later on, but they were used as in clip form on television. I remember, once again, almost as soon as I started watching wrestling on television, from 73 and 74, seeing highlights from the Mid-South Coliseum, even on the Louisville version of the show, where Lawler would win the title or Fargo would win the title or whatever big occurrence would take place. And you saw 10,000 plus people in this arena screaming and yelling. It's jam-packed, and it just looked like Memphis was the center of the wrestling universe, which is what they were going for. In Florida, the title changes, not only world championships, but also the regional title changes. You would see clips of that still exist. Eddie Graham was, like you said, real early with it. It just depended. Bruiser actually did his TV show in the Expo Center in Indianapolis. Underneath the two main events that might not be on television, he'd have 8 preliminary matches, and maybe occasionally you'd get a Bob Ellis and Baron von Raschke match every once in a while for the title. So he didn't even have studio TV. He was already shooting in an arena, but it just depends on what it was. It was a whole lot easier once videotape came around, because the filming thing, you had to actually take the film back and get it developed. But I know they did that in the old days in Atlanta for the Georgia TV, even before TBS went on satellite. When we were down there in 1983, we couldn't afford, in that summer, the Georgia Wrestling Superstars group, we couldn't afford a camera. So Ronnie West found the old film camera that was still in the Georgia Wrestling office at the Omni that they had used in the early 70s to shoot at the City Auditorium or at the Omni and put back in the show. And he brought that, and we actually shot an angle on 16 millimeter film in 1983.
I always love the way that looked when they go back to the locker room and it's you and the Angel.
Yeah.
I always love the way that looked, because it's like, this can't be 1983. Like, when is this made?
It looked like, and we're in the Memorial Auditorium in Chattanooga, which the dressing rooms were last renovated when fucking Grover Cleveland was president, right? and it just looked so old and gritty. It was like antique wrestling. And boy, and also poor Frank Morrell, the Angel, he wasn't happy with the juice he got after they broke the boards over. Bobby Fulton and Terry Taylor broke the boards over him and Jerry Novak's heads. So I look over as they're bringing the camera in. He's in the mirror gigging again to get some more color. I'm like, Jesus, Frank. He's like, I got to make it right. You know, he was trying, doing everything we could to, pop that territory.
The Mid-Atlantic films, which of course are available at jimcornette.com. Do you know who filmed them? Who was the actual cameraman? And also, what was the purpose? Because they didn't really use arena clips at that period of time in the 70s on TV too often, did they?
Well, they did every now and then. And also some of the film that was transferred were interviews. Like there's the interview with Ole and Gene in the hospital in Atlanta where Gene's had the neck surgery and Ole is vowing to get even. That type of thing was meant for television. The Carolinas, they were running big buildings. They were drawing big crowds. They had a little more money. So these films, in addition to, there's things on there like when Gene was a referee and turned on Steamboat and the match was Flair. Things that were shot for television, but in a lot of cases, I think they were shooting some of that for posterity. There's Steamboat and Harley for the world title. There's Johnny Weaver and Dory Funk Jr. Some of that for the NWA title, which I think is probably from 73. But some of it's preliminary matches and it's all over the page, but they had a lot. I assume at one point they probably had a lot more. And that's just what was left when they stopped cleaning out the office and throwing things out. And it sat there for let's see, 1979 till 1989, sat there for 10 years. They probably had more at the start.
Our next question, Jim, was emailed to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Kyle in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When you worked for the WWF, did you have many interactions with Linda McMahon? Any stories of Linda when you were at the McMahon house?
No, whenever I was at the McMahon house, Linda was never there because it was always usually on a Wednesday during the day. She was actually at the office. So we very seldom saw Linda at the house. Linda is the nicest, normalist one. She's a very nice lady. She seems normal. I don't think she ever wanted to be in the performing side of showbiz, which is why she looked so awkward and not into it when they made her do stuff on Raw. I hate now that she's, basically enabling the criminal that's in the White House because I always liked Linda. Now I've found the first thing that I have found to not like her is she's trying to help this fucking piece of shit torment us again for another 4 years. But up until that, I never really had anything against Linda. She's nice and normal. She's not a over the top personality. Unfortunately, we've found out she's just a fucking Republican. So there's that. But I really have no outrageous Linda stories because it was, basically our interaction was usually at the office, every once in a while in the morning at the house, hello, goodbye, and occasionally some marketing meetings. And otherwise they did their thing, Linda and the business end on their end of the fourth floor, and us nuts in creative were over on Vince's end of the fourth floor.
What did you think about the recent news that they will be selling Titan Tower to rent office space in a different building?
Well, did you see what the rent is? It's like $20 million a year. I don't know nothing about big business, folks, and how that works. But if you own your own building and you're going to sell it, and you're going to rent someplace for $20 million a year, I don't know. But I guess they've got somebody smarter than me telling them how to make their investments. But that's an awful big fucking rent check to have to write.
Maybe the new owner doesn't want the real estate. You ever think of that?
The new owner of what?
I can't say any more about this right now. But let's get another question here on the show, Jim.
Oh, come. Now don't start rumors. I thought you meant the new owner of Titan Tower.
Remember what I said. They're going to sell the company. The first step will be the stock buyback, which is happening right now. But we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, mark that down in everybody's little black books wherever you keep them. But Brian Last thinks they're dumping the fucking thing.
The next question was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Randall Keogh. Jim once did a photo shoot for Raw magazine with Triple H teaching Mantar to be civilized. It ended with Triple H putting Cornette's face in a cream pie. I forgot about this. Yeah. Any memories about this photo shoot?
Yes. God damn it. It was back when we used to do like pay-per-view and then 2 or 3 days of taping, like a Raw taping, a Superstars taping, and then a challenge taping was the B show syndication back in those days. So we're already doing TV like 3 or 4 days in a row, and we're in Wheeling, West Virginia. And they said, hey, we want you to do a shoot with Mantar and he was Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the blue blood in those days. All right. But I had to get up before TV. I had to go downtown Wheeling to this fucking restaurant that's up on, the top floor of a hotel there or whatever. And it's got the big view. And then I'm going to have to go straight to the Civic Center, which is so it's already eaten up some of my day. And I'm not trying to say I didn't want to do a photo shoot with Mantar, but I didn't want to do a fucking photo shoot with Mantar. What good is this going to do me, right? And at the time, Triple H was a fucking prelim guy, so I'm like, And of course, I end up with the cream pie, but I have to do the face and the cream pie and then go to the building. Well, I've got cream pie in my hair. I'm like, well, now it looks like I've got greasy hair, sort of like that Seinfeld episode where he got the new shower head and his hair just wasn't right. And so, and I didn't even get to eat lunch because we were rushed in this restaurant. So it's one of the goofy things they used to do then, and that's pretty much what it was.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Sean Downs. Jim, is there any truth that Macho Man Randy Savage pistol whipped Bill Dundee in 1982?
Actually, did Savage get the gun and hit him with it, or Dundee went for the gun and Savage hit him with something he had in his hand?
I've heard both stories.
Regardless, I don't think pistol whipping does it justice. This was at the time where Jarrett's group and the Poffos ICW group, obviously the Poffos were running outlaw opposition to Jarrett, so there was heat on everybody's part. And then apparently Dundee, and I think these tights were even made or given to him by a fan or whatever, but he had Macho Man on the ass of his wrestling trunks, which of course was Macho Man Randy Savage's gimmick. So back when the days when you got mad about stuff like that, Dundee was in Hendersonville or somewhere around Nashville at the gym working out one day and appeared from out of nowhere. Randy Savage, I think he had George Weingeroff because George was a shooter, high school, college amateur wrestling shooter.
They were all there. They were all there.
Pez Watley was there.
Thunderbolt Patterson was there.
Thunderbolt Patterson was there. So
Rip Rogers was there.
Well, I didn't know whether Rip was there or not. But I know that also I believe Debbie Combs was was it Debbie Combs or was it Candy Devine that was the lookout?
Candy Devine.
Candy Devine, that's right. I'm sorry, I don't mean to malign Debbie. But anyway, somebody found out Dundee was at the gym and they call and stooge. It may have been Candy Devine. And here rolls everybody up from ICW and they accost Dundee in the parking lot where he's trying, okay, no problem. Let me just set my bag in my trunk where he can get his gun because he's going to shoot all these motherfuckers. But then as he was pulling it out, they glommed him, and Savage either got the gun and smacked him in the side of the head with it or already had something and punched him in the side of the head, but broke his jaw and necessitated him taking, I think it was a couple or 3 weeks off from wrestling because I think he had to get it wired and the whole 9 yards. And there was heat there because now not only, I'm sure Jarrett took care of him, but not only did you incapacitate one of the top baby faces in the territory and hurt the houses for a couple of weeks, but also that's one of those things that people don't forget. And coincidentally, when it all got settled, as we talked about here on the program not long ago, Dundee's the one guy that left to go to Louisiana before they could bring Randy Savage back, or Randy Savage into Memphis after that they had closed ICW down and do the deal with Lawler, because I'm pretty sure Dundee probably at that point would have gone for the gun again had he seen Randy Savage in person. So that was one of those deals.
A couple other little clues here. Recently on the Superpodcast, I had Todd Lloyd, who's probably best known as being the fat kid, as he put it, in Ernest Goes to Camp, which was filmed in the Nashville area, which is where he grew up. And he said to me that Candy Devine worked at the gym in Nashville. So that
that's there you go. Candy Devine called in and said, "Hey, guess who's here?" And then they all came on down.
And then the second thing is, I believe Rip Rogers said on the Superpodcast, because he went into great detail about the whole thing, that the first phone call that was made was to Saul Weingeroff, because he was a sheriff's deputy, right, in the area.
Well, but he was, but also he had been on the outs with Jerry Jarrett since 1972, when, as detailed in my book, Tuesday Night at the Gardens. And George Weingeroff claims there's more to it than this. However, Saul Weingeroff was always a Nick Goulas guy, and he was the top manager out of Nashville for 10 or 15 years with the Von Brauners and whoever else. You put Saul with them, they've got heat, right? When Jerry Jarrett took over and opened up the Memphis, the Louisville and Evansville end to go along with Memphis, he started using Sam Bass. He started using other managers. He started bringing new talent in. That, along with, at the time when he opened up Lexington, it ran on the same night as Bowling Green, Kentucky, Thursday nights. And Bowling Green was 60 miles from Nashville, whereas Lexington was 210. And Saul went in and told Nick Goulas one day, said, "Well, that boy, if he's running Lexington, make sure I'm on the card in Bowling Green. He didn't want to go all the way up to Lexington. Well, when Lexington started out drawing Bowling Green and the payoffs got better, Jerry Jarrett says that Saul Weingeroff came to him and said, well, when am I going to get booked in Lexington? And he said, I understand you don't want to, and I don't intend to violate your wishes. Having said that, that's an awful strong reason to quit and go opposition. But son of a gun, within 6 months, Saul and the Von Brauners were working for Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling and running opposition to Jarrett and Nick and Roy all up and down the 64 corridor. So Saul had been on the outs with Jerry Jarrett and all the guys in his territory for years at that point. But he did also work in the sheriff's department. So that was probably a track covering call.
You said George Weingeroff has a different story. Have you talked to George Weingeroff about this?
No, I heard somebody said that George said, well, now that's not necessarily all that happened. And once again, when we're talking about 45 years ago with heat between managers and wrestlers and promoters and bookers and everything, I'm open to interpretation. But Saul made up at one point with Nick after that, but he never again worked with wrestling in anything that Jerry Jarrett was involved in after 1972. And he also, even in later years, 76 with the IWA and the Islanders and et cetera, he ran opposition, worked opposition to Nick in Nashville. So he was figured in for 15 years. It was unshakable. And then suddenly he was always on the outs from that point on.
How overlooked do you think Saul and the Von Brauners are in terms of being major attractions?
Oh, God, they were one of the biggest tag teams of the 60s everywhere. Florida, Tennessee, Texas, California. They went everywhere. They were the Von Brauners. It's hard to explain now, but there were gimmicks that in the territory days that kind of went with each other, like the Von Brauners, the Von Steigers, the Otto von Heller, whatever, the Germans, right? The Von Brauners were seen as the main event, real, original German team at that point. And then other teams were kind of like Von Brauner-like. Because people did the same gimmicks in different places in those days, right? But, you know, of German tag teams in the 60s and 70s, the Von Brauners were seen by the fans as like the big ones, the real deal.
One more question here, Jim, and then I can't wait to hear what you have over there. But this
that's because you can't find anymore. Now you go back to Jordan. Jordan, I'm sure, can fill some time.
This one was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Alexander Supgull.
What?
Supgull.
What you do and you'll clean it up?
Supgul. You're not going to give it a try?
I don't even know what to say.
If the AWA invasion of the NWA angle had proceeded as scheduled during the mid-'80s, how, if at all, do you believe it would have changed the professional wrestling landscape as we know it?
When was there going to be an AWA invasion of the NWA?
I don't know of any invasion in the mid-1980s. That's why I asked it. I thought maybe you knew something I didn't know.
There was, to my knowledge, there was never a planned AWA invasion of the NWA. Now, the AWA and NWA talent worked on some of the same cards in the Northeast at that point, in Baltimore and Philly for a short period of time, and the Meadowlands. Part of that was due to the Pro Wrestling USA thing when Vince started expanding. The other promoters tried to get together. Watts stayed out of it because he knew, I think, how it was going to fucking end and nobody was going to be able to get along. But the people that were really in it were Crockett and Gagne. And so, like on the Meadowlands, you had both the NWA and the AWA world titles being defended. Or the first Meadowlands show that we went to, I think, was Flair was there working with somebody. We defended the NWA World Tag title against the Rock and Roll. Stan Hansen was there with the AWA title. And in Baltimore, because Gary Juster's from Minneapolis, so he knew Vern, a bunch of people in Vern's office, and he had opened up Baltimore as kind of like a combination city. But over that year and a half or so, The NWA guys, obviously, at that time got over better because it was Flair and those guys, and they're going to get over better. And, the Pro Wrestling USA thing fell apart, and everybody wasn't working together as nicely as they had been. And basically Crockett just said, fuck it. Vern still had the Road Warriors until Crockett got them full time in late 85, early 86. After that, there was no fucking chance. It was it. Crockett's guys were going to, do the Northeast on their own.
Were there any talks when you were on the booking committee in later 1989, early 1990 about doing something with the AWA, who was obviously in its death spiral at that period of time, but still had some talent, and they had the relationship between Flair and Vern and various other people? Any talk at all?
No, not officially. There were a bunch of AWA guys calling to see if they could get a spot. But see, here's the thing. Flair had a relationship with Vern Gagne from 15 years earlier that Vern's camp is what broke him in. It wasn't like they were talking on the phone every day. The AWA at that point had... I apologize to everybody that was still there, but they had nothing really in 89 that anybody, the TV was rotten. Most of the talent was gone. I've told the story before, that fucking lunatic. I would say Kevin Kelly, and people would think the announcer, but he worked as Kevin Kelly, Kevin Washoles, who was Nails at that point, right, for the WWF, and jacked Vince up against the wall. He was just a nut. But he actually, he looked good. He looked like Thor, the God of Thunder, long blonde hair, and he was like 6'5" or whatever. This was before Nails. He honestly had gotten by with looking like a pretty boy baby face. You remember, he had a good body. I don't know what happened to him in that short few years that he became Nails, and he looked like a fucking, he'd been floating in the river for 3 days. But anyway. He contacted Flair, and Flair brought him in for and we didn't do these a lot back in those days, but he had a dark match at one of the TV tapings at Center Stage. And Flair said, told us that I'm going to bring this guy in. Let's take a look at him, see if anybody's got any ideas. And so he had a match. And then because I was doing commentary at the time on the TBS show, I interviewed him. And he did a match, and it was and he did an interview, and it was And so anyway, I think a couple weeks later, Flair comes in and says, let me tell you this story. Good Lord. Fucking Kevin Kelly had called him and said, Rick, when can I start? And Flair said, well, Kevin, we got a lot of guys right now. We got contracts. We just don't have any room right now. We'll keep it in mind. And his response to Flair was, well, fire somebody. I need a fucking job. And Flair couldn't wait to tell that story, because if I've never heard, fire somebody, I need a job. Who the fuck are you? We weren't that blown away to begin with, right? If we were going to fire somebody to bring somebody in, it wouldn't be you. Oh, fuck. There you go.
All right, well.
The AWA invasion, it petered out.
From what I understand, you may or may not have a few questions over there.
Well, I might have a couple of things. It's just some emails reminded me of a few things. Thomas writes, on your last experience, and this has been a while, you spoke about how whenever the gangsters were checked for weapons or grease by the referee, they went into I'm getting frisked pose. This got me thinking. I have never seen a single time where the ref was checking someone before the match and the ref actually found something. Is there something I'm forgetting, or has a referee never actually found anything? This is funny because I actually, especially on spot shows, a couple times Smokey About Wrestling, whatever the fuck, I would have Hildebrand find shit on me, right? And I think it was Dusty's idea originally, because in one of the deals that I did where I was forced to wrestle Ronnie Garvin, when the one in Charlotte, I got thrown in a cage and it just jump started. But on a couple of the others, we started with I was in a sling and the referee finds a goddamn chain in my sling and finds something else. Whatever. It's been done. Yes. Over the years in the territories, it has been done that the referee would find something. And I remember even Lawler doing a deal, because Lawler, when he was a heel, was noted for hiding a chain in his elbow pad or in his boot or whatever. He'd bring the chain out, a dog choker chain, wrap it around your fist, boom. As a matter of fact, for years, I carried a chain in my bag as part of my manager's stock. So the referee would find the chain in his elbow pad at the start of the match, and then at the end of the match, you'd find out he had another one in his boot or whatever the fuck. But it has happened. It's just, once again, referees barely even, do they even check anybody anymore? The whole idea is it's like a boxing match. Wrestling matches used to be like a boxing match. The referee would bring the two combatants to the center of the ring and explain the rules to them, and check them for fucking grease on their body or any foreign objects or substances or whatever the fuck, and then you'd have your match. But I remember one story that Ronnie West told me. Ronnie West was a great referee. Except for Tommy Young, Ronnie may have been the guy, right? And he hated to be buried. He always liked to referee it like a shoot, to where, guys would distract him or whatever. He didn't just want to see shit. Well, Brute Bernard worked a lot in Atlanta in the 60s and 70s. And he was a French Canadian guy with a strong accent, but because he was a crazy bald-headed brute, he never really talked on interviews. So you didn't know that he was this, articulate French Canadian, but he was a big, ugly, bald-headed, and he's crazy. He's like a Pampero Firpo or a Sheik or Abdullah the Butcher. He's a wild man. He's going to tear everything apart at ringside. He's going to use objects and everything. One time, fucking Brute Bernard goes out of the ring. He goes under the ring. He comes out with a fucking 2x4, right? Ronnie said, it's like fucking, it's an actual board, a 2x4 from under the ring, and it's about at least 3 feet long. And Brute Bernard takes it, puts it behind his back, sticks the end of it in the back of his trunks behind him, right? Like he's hiding it from the referee. The fucking board is sticking a foot up over his fucking head. It's in his tights from behind. And Ronnie's looking at him, and Brute Bernard says, "Don't see it." Well, it was funny when Ronnie told me that. Don't see it. He's got this giant board. Can you picture this, Brian?
I can picture.
If you can visualize it, but and he says, "And don't see it." Well, what am I supposed to fucking look at? But Brute Bernard, he was legendary for establishing the word cocksucker in the wrestling locker room. No, because the way he'd say it with his accent, it made it sound refined. It's like, "A cocksucker? What do you mean, cocksucker?"
There is a clip I recently saw of him in Memphis. Maybe, what was it, 70? What year was
77.
He? 77.
With Homer Odell and the Angel.
And Homer Odell and the Angel, I think Homer Odell's yelling at Lance. I haven't seen this in a little while. And the Angel's doing whatever. Brute Bernard grabs the mic and he starts wobbling his legs and he just goes, "Ah!" And it's the funniest thing, but he's a maniac, obviously, but it's hysterical because you never see anyone do that.
Well, and also that had happened right after Homer Odell got a bucket of yellow paint turned over his head by Plowboy Frazier and Armand Hussein.
Yes.
And he's yelling at what's happened, and Lance is trying to hold the microphone but stand back so that he doesn't get paint all over his fucking brand new Baxter suit. And fucking Lance says, "All right, well, just don't get too close to me, Homer. Oh, shut up before I kiss you, Lance." And the Brute's going crazy. And then Homer Odell kicks the Angel in the ass to run him off, and that was right before Lance Russell's greatest pitch ever. And the Homer Odell, the manager in the German army helmet and the field marshal's outfit, who is just actually, he's the field marshal of this militia he's put together, a Brute Bernard and the Angel. He's just actually told people, you cannot do this to a field marshal. And he's just actually said those words. And there's Frank Morrell, the Angel, with the fucking claw and the bald head. And there's fucking Brute Bernard weebling and wobbling. And they fucking trail yellow paint out of the studio. And then Lance pitches to the break with, "We'll be right back. We got a big midget match coming up right after this."
You bring up the referee finding items on a guy when searching him. I'm going to assume that he got it from Lawler because he took so much from Lawler when he booked. But I remember Eddie Gilbert in Global, when I think he was managed by Bruce Pritchard, after like a few weeks in a row of just, actually it was Global, it was on every day, a few days in a row of cheating, the referee starts searching him and finds multiple items. You know, a lighter in his boot, a chain in his elbow, like one item after another. And it was actually really cool because I'd never seen that before. It was so fresh to me that all these years later. I haven't seen it since it originally aired in like 92, but it still stands out.
Because it makes sense. And Billy Spears, his gimmick in Alabama was the mad magician, because he would make objects appear out of nowhere, or he would throw fire or whatever. And so they would have two referees in the match to search the mad magician, Billy Spears, or whatever. Just more ways to make things interesting. But since we have no time limits or referees instructions or referees checking or anything about wrestling that you used to be able to play with anymore, we can't do any of these things. I have another letter. Good. So you don't have to do any work here. This is from Jim, and I can't pronounce this last name, ChMielinski. You'll never guess he's from Chicago.
Never guess.
Jim, Bob Luce was an icon. I was in high school in the late 1960s and got hooked on wrestling. 11 a.m. Sunday morning was wrestling on Channel 26 in Chicago. We'd see a mixture of shows from Indianapolis and All-Star Wrestling from Minnesota, because obviously Bruiser and Gagne both owned Chicago. In the beginning, Bob Luce's delivery was more low-key, but every year he ramped up his delivery to a new level of crazy. He was making up his promos or voiceovers on the fly, sometimes making no sense. Between his promos and commercials hawking Moo and Oink, Ben's Auto, Al's Chicago, #1 Chicago Italian Beef, and Shock Electric, they were iconic. It was like watching a bad car wreck. You didn't want to, but you had to watch. When I had the chance to meet Bob a few times at the Stockyard Inn or at a card at his kids' high school, he was a different guy, kind of shy and very soft-spoken. In later years, he had a talk show format on Channel 44 for in-between matches. This was the Bob Luce Wrestling Classics, I think. Wrestlers would sit in on a Q&A with occasional run-ins and beatdowns to set up next month's card. By the way, the 98-pound Andy Frayne security would run in to subdue the wrestlers. There were several weeks of a young Randy Poffo talking about playing minor league baseball for the White Sox. Pepper Gomez, I've seen this clip, was billed as the man with the cast iron stomach, so they ran a VW Beetle and parked it on his stomach. They drove it. They had the board and the ramp, and they drove the one inside of the VW Beetle over Pepper Gomez's stomach. For real. Angelo Poffo did nonstop sit-ups for the whole show. Mr. 6033. What's 6033, Brian?
That was the amount of sit-ups that he did that got him into the Guinness Book of World Records.
You are correct. And he had it on the back of his jacket when he was the miser. That's right. 6033. And Savage would call him, just ask 6033 there. But Poffo did sit-ups for the whole hour. We did that with Rip Rogers one time on Smoky Mountain Wrestling. He did knee bends for an hour. Or Pampiro Firpo bending an iron bar in his mouth. The late 60s and 70s was unbelievable for wrestling at the amphitheater in Chicago. Near sellouts every month, 10,000 people all jacked up. I miss those days. Pretty much stopped following current wrestling in around 2005. No storytelling, no build-up. I'm glad to see old-time wrestling is making a comeback. Another testimony to the iconic stature of the legendary Bob Luce in the city of Chi-Town.
Tell him Bobo!
What about it, Moose? Num, 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 num. When he's working, chewing the sandwich for the Al's #1 Chicago Italian Beef commercial, when he's not even eating it for real. I wonder if Moose was on a fucking diabetic diet there at that point or whatever. Anyway, here's one from Rick. I just thought that this was funny because it mentions Klondike Bill. When I was about 9 or 10, I went to see Bob Geigel's promotion of All-Star Wrestling circa 1967 or 8. Used to watch it on Saturday night and or Sunday noon on KSN in Great Bend, Kansas. The main event was Roger Nature Boy Kirby versus Klondike Bill. On your podcast today, I heard you talking about when shit goes south in a match. I don't know what the finish was, but toward the end, Bill slammed Kirby in the middle of the ring, and the ring floor gave way, and Roger went right to the floor. He popped up looking out on his feet. Bill grabbed him and took it home. Kirby was my favorite worker of all time because of that, and I went home convinced that shit was real. In conclusion, fuck Trump. Thank you, Rick. I wanted to read that just for that, but no. Things can happen when the ring breaks. I swear to God, I saw the same kind of thing, and when I was about the same age, it was a couple of years later, but like 1972 or 3, I remember it was some heels, but there were Bearcat Brown and Big Bill Dromo were in this match with the heels or whatever. It was a TV studio. It was one of Nick's shows. It wasn't the Memphis show. It was one of Nick's shows from like Chattanooga or maybe Birmingham or whatever. And the middle of the ring caved in. And I was not, obviously acquainted with how rings were constructed back in those days. So I didn't know that, these cheap, shitty spot show rings that sometimes they'd use for a TV studio or whatever the fuck, or in some cases, even the big towns in those days. If at any point, these things were a rubber band and a fucking paper clip away from falling apart. But I'll never forget it because when the middle caved in and they were like, what the fuck? And the announcer's going, well, ladies and gentlemen, we don't know what to do. They figured out that somewhere or another they could just put the heel, if the heel put his feet in the middle of the ring, it looked like an inverted thing of Jiffy Pop. It was bowed in the middle. If the heel put his feet in the middle of the ring and he just leaned back, he was almost 90 degrees up in the air, but his shoulders were on the mat and they took it home that way. And I was like, what the fuck? I was at a spot show one time. Ken Wayne brought his ring in Tennessee somewhere. I'd just gotten a business, and Buddy Wayne didn't change the boards in that ring a lot or the ropes or anything else. And I mean, the canvas hadn't been cleaned in 3 years, but some way or another, the boards broke in. Somebody took a big backdrop or whatever, and several of the boards broke right in the middle in half, which normally wouldn't be a problem because you've got steel supports underneath. That's what makes the clank clank, right? Because those steel cross beams run underneath. But now the boards were broken that run all the way across the 18-foot ring. The boards were broken in the middle. And also some of them didn't meet the framework on the apron of the ring. So every time that guys in a tag match walked up and down the apron without thinking, it would bow the middle of the ring straight up underneath the canvas, and it looked like a giant balloon blowing up. And these things sometimes happen, and hilarity ensues.
I once saw a video of Buddy Rose at the very end when he was really, really big, and he took a bump right in the middle of the ring, and then the ring just started sinking, and like he ended up, the middle of the ring just sank all the way down. And the people there loved it because you never expect to see something like that. But then he had to climb out.
Yeah, and therein lies the problem. All right, here one more. Alex writes, I've got one more. I'll give you time to find something really good. I'm going to try to condense this somewhat. I know that you were on creative teams, but if you were not in creative at a promotion, how much sway would a manager have backstage? Were you treated like another wrestling talent, or would they come to you as if you were in charge of the Midnight or a specific wrestler you were managing? I've also heard you tell stories of talents just saying no to certain matches promotions wanted them to have or people they wanted them to drop a title to. My second question is, if a talent says no to something, does it normally end right there? Or is that only if you're a top talent? Were any wrestlers you know of ever forced into matches that they had said no to, either by the promotion just telling them, no, you're going to fucking do it, or using some legal excuse like contractual obligations? If this did occur, do you know of any examples where it turned into a shoot because it was forced? Besides the obvious Montreal screw job, yeah. No, first question. In a lot of cases, especially at TV, obviously in Mid-South in Louisiana, we did what Bill Dundee told us to do because I was definitely learning, and Bobby and Dennis, we were all glad to have the spot. And, of course, then there was still a lot of leeway left. And on promos, Dundee or even Watts would give you the bullet points and things, lines he might specifically want you to say, but the delivery was up to you. So we had a lot of freedom in that respect, more than they have these days. In Dallas, they started coming to me somewhat as the manager on, obviously, and always booking sheets and checks and paperwork and documents, that from the very start, because I always kept up with that for the Midnight. Then they started coming to me for some ideas in Dallas. And then when we went to work for Crockett, obviously we were going to follow Dusty through hell with gasoline britches on, and any, JJ, any of his representatives or whatever. But after a while, and I wasn't as assertive as I am now back then. But when they got the idea that, okay, here's what Cornette does for these guys, I got all the plane tickets. I got all the booking sheets. I got all the official documents. I got all the paychecks. Anything that was given out by the office, I was the guy to go to for the Midnight Express. Also, especially on television, especially at the TBS tapings, basically JJ would just say, okay, you've got Vernon Deaton and David Isley. You got 5 minutes. Set it up. And I would, because I took time to pay attention to the guys who were doing jobs on TV, and we knew them, and we knew who they were. We knew what they could do and what they couldn't do. And then I was the move inventor for the Midnight and the move namer. So if I would come up with something that Bobby and Dennis, or later on Bobby and Stan, we needed to try out. You never got in a ring those days unless you were in front of people. So we tried shit out on TBS against the job guys, which is, when you look back at it, national TV is not a great time to try shit out, but that was the time we had. So a lot of the Midnight Express finishes that you see from those days were done first on Atlanta TV, just to see how it worked. And I would get with the guys and tell them how to take it, because we would have worked that out in our heads ahead of time so nobody got hurt. And then, after a while, then I got more input on the matches and the house show matches. We'd get a finish, so-and-so over, and I might suggest something, or we'd get a finish and they'd say, do what you did in Philadelphia. And I'd have that in my book because I'd written it down. So that way, when we were in Austin, Texas, and somebody said, do what you did in Philadelphia, I'd be the one that would remember it. So, yes, there was a level of, treating me like a manager of the team in that respect. But guys had sway back then depending on their spot on the card. If we had done a lot of it, we could have probably gotten away with saying, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do something else. But a lot of times we just made what they wanted something that we liked too, and did it. It wasn't until TBS took over that we really started butting heads with any office anywhere we ever worked. As far as talent saying no to certain matches or to drop a championship or whatever, I've said before, it seemed to me to be around the mid-90s when the booker's instructions became the booker's suggestions. And I still am not used to that. But all talents have always had the ability to, in some respect, to say no, whether it's no, fuck it, I've had enough, here's my notice, I'm fucking done, or I'm walking out or whatever, or no, I don't want to do it this way, I want to do it the way I want to do it. Ernie Ladd was a master of that. But the top guys had to protect their reputations, and they didn't want to just do jobs willy-nilly to everybody in every territory. They always wanted input in how they were portrayed, and to some extent the success or failure they had in the ring, because it all related to business. And in those days, they were getting paid based on the gates. So even if a top star felt that the booker wanted him to do something, like in the Destroyer bio in the Observer recently, they wanted him to take his mask off. At first, he didn't want to wear the mask, but when he saw it getting over, then he didn't want to take it off. And they wanted to take the mask off, and he said fucking no, and didn't. And he ended up being a legend and making, tons of money with that mask. So if you were a top star figured into a territory, you had a lot of leeway, as long as you didn't just become a, real bitter pill to fucking deal with. Sometimes you could avoid doing a job or do it a different way, or sometimes you could change certain matches to benefit yourself, but then the booker also had to worry about the other guy, because the other guy may have been as important to him as the guy that was complaining. Underneath guys just need to do what the fuck you tell them to do, because they ought to be happy to be there, because anybody else could be. Guys in the middle, if it's something ridiculous, then that's on a case-by-case basis. Ole didn't like it that time. I told him they weren't going to put a pumpkin over my fucking head, but he didn't fire me just because I wouldn't take a fucking pumpkin over the head. And then we ended up walking out 3 days later. So it saved him the trouble. But just because you don't want to do every single thing doesn't mean you were always going to get fired, because half the time bookers in those days realized that they were in charge of a bunch of fucking, outlaw wrestlers, and they were going to have headaches from time to time. So they just tried to have a good batting average with getting most of the stuff they wanted done.
But would Ole have fired you if it had been his idea instead of Jim Herd's idea?
I think that was probably Ole's idea.
Oh,
I think it was probably Ole's idea just because he was trying to. Look, none of this was Ole's idea, and that he was doing a wrestling pay-per-view where the announcers were dressed like fucking gangsters from the 30s, and and everybody was dressing up in fucking costumes and this bullshit. So I'm sure right there already we've crossed Ole's fucking comfort zone. But he, knowing that the office wanted a bunch of Halloweeny shit and there's fucking pumpkins everywhere, well, they could hit you over the head with a pumpkin. You run around with a jack-o'-lantern on your head. No, I won't, Ole, because we're already doing a job in the fucking first match to a makeshift team. And then the fucking guys that we're working a program with, I'm causing to get beat against the Freebirds. And so now that we've both fucking lost in the first 3 fucking matches, then you're going to have them take all the heat back off me with the pumpkin. I ain't putting the pumpkin on my fucking head.
They should have done it with Heyman. He had so much makeup on, his face was orange anyway.
Paul E. would run to the makeup chair whenever they started bringing. No, seriously, he looked forward to it. They started doing makeup at the TBS TVs when Turner bought the company. And then they've got a goddamn makeup play. Nobody used makeup on wrestling TV. Announcers, wrestlers, whoever, just the girls back then. And there weren't that many of them. And I always thought it was ridiculous. But because I think Paul saw it as it's, well, this is like real TV, and we've got a makeup person, and I'm really a host of a show or whatever the fuck. And I was like, to this day, I don't wear makeup. I don't want that greasy, powdery, shitty shit on my face. It makes me uncomfortable. This is what I look like, for good and bad. There's a few blotches, not as bad as it could be, but I ain't fucking putting that shit in the WWF. They would make me get in that chair, and I would just give me a little powder, and then I'd go wipe off as much as I could before it got on my fucking shirt. Just horrible. Hate it. Hate it.
Who was the worst offender in the WWF? Wearing too much makeup, not a wrestler.
Hogan. Well, no, the wrestlers weren't wearing it, but the announcers were.
Right.
God, I'll tell you what, fucking. I remember Michael Cole having some thick shit on it, but Todd Pettingill used to get makeup also. I remember. They all loved it. JR even put up with it. I don't think he loved it, but he put up with it. But I would sneak off, and then after a while they'd quit looking for me, and I'd sometimes slip in without anything on. I don't think anybody tuned in the program or tuned out of the program because of what I looked like or whether I was wearing makeup or not.
When did they decide, WCW, I don't know if you were still there or not, so if you weren't, just say you weren't, that they needed to have Missy Hyatt take classes to lose her Southern accent?
I think that was right after I left, because I think that was probably 91 or 92. That was just another... They bought into the thing, well, we don't want to be seen as just a Southern wrestling show, which is what everybody watched it for. And nobody, because it was Southern wrestling, not because people had Southern accents, nobody gave a shit whether the announcers or the talent had accents or not. Everybody's got to be from somewhere. But I would sit when I was in the WWF and I'd hear all this Southern accent thing. It's Vince's, touchy spot because he grew up poor in the trailer park or whatever. But I would sit and listen to Shitstain try to do commentary for the WWF New York show that was just aired on Channel 9. And I know that people there knew what he was saying, but he was unintelligible to the rest of the universe. My wife at the time, one time, walked in the room when the program was playing, and she said, I have not understood one word that he said. What is he fucking saying? It was to anybody outside, whatever, the Bronx or Queens or whatever the fuck, anybody from Montana to California to Texas to Florida, you would not have been able to figure out what the motherfucker was saying, but nobody ever said anything about a New York accent. It was just Southern accents. It's silly. Everybody's from somewhere. If you talk like you look and you can talk, that's all that matters.
I think we have time for at least one more question, but let's get this in and see what happens. This was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Dale Wiley. Something I never paid attention to as a kid, but have noticed now as I watch wrestling videos from the 70s and 80s, is why does it hurt to fall to the mat when a wrestler misses a drop kick, but not when they hit the drop kick? The distance to the ground is the exact same.
Well, there's another thing that the announcers used to tell us that they don't anymore. And actually, since I am technically an announcer again, I would say this when it comes up, except that usually the match is going at 114 miles an hour and there's no time to really call or register anything. However, when I first saw someone miss a drop kick in wrestling these many years ago, it was explained by the announcer that when a guy's going up for a drop kick and he kicks the guy right in the chest with both feet or right in the face with both feet, and he pushes off, he can control how he's landing. But when he goes up expecting to hit that object and is controlling how he's landing, but instead he misses it, it throws his balance and his trajectory and his landing off, and he falls awkwardly and dazes himself. And when you think about it, that actually kind of does make sense.
Yeah, that's a good explanation.
And that's the kind of explanations we used to get when the guys didn't used to rush through all their shit and miss 3 fucking drop kicks as quickly as they can jump up and down, and then everybody comes to a stalemate waiting for the round of tennis applause.
Speaking of tennis applause, one last question here, Jim. This was sent in by W. Mullins. Do you feel that given the same opportunity...
Wait a minute, is this Michael Mullins hiding his identity, or is this the woman that used to be married to WW and the Dixie Dance Kings?
I think this is a different Mullins altogether, not Jeff Mullins either. But Jim, do you feel that given the same opportunities that Hickerson and Condrey could have been as successful as Condrey and Eaton?
Oh, God. Yes and no. I truthfully think that they were such a great heel tag team that if they had gotten a chance to be pushed in any given territory, that they would have gotten over as the top heel team at the time. I don't think in hindsight that they would have been as big nationally and internationally and worldwide as the Midnight Express, not only because Bobby was just so special to the equation, but also because they had me. And Phil Hickerson and Dennis Condrey never had me. But yeah, they were capable of being a top heel team in any territory in the country in the 70s, in my opinion.
Well, with that, the drive-thru is mercifully closed.
Well,
that's the sound of the cult of Cornette out there right now.
Hey, they can't all be winners. Sometimes the cake doesn't quite rise. What can we say?
Remember, you can follow Jim on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com or available wherever you find your favorite podcast. You can visit Cornette's Collectibles at JimCornette.com for autographed photos, books, DVDs, burger towels, restraining orders, and so much more.
So much more.
Cornette's Collectibles at JimCornette.com. We want to remind you to subscribe to our official, the only official, Jim Cornette YouTube channel, tinyurl.com/official Corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette. It is the very first thing that'll pop up. Every episode goes up with exclusive Travis Heckel artwork. So if you enjoy the show and you want to pass it on to someone else, that's the place to go. tinyurl.com/official Corny YouTube. And I think we've gotten through everything. Is that right?
You think a lot of them will be passing this show we did today on along to their friends?
I'd like to pass on it. But
or
anyway.
Possibly their enemies.
Well, we'll find out pretty soon. But until then, until the experience, whenever that returns, and the drive-thru, which will be next Monday, that will be on the regular schedule. For Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!
Giddy up!